We play to 21. I get 19 points to start. And the ball. Big 10, Big 12, ACC, SEC, the other conferences. Hi everyone, this is Will O'Toole welcoming you to another edition of Park Ridge Sports History. This week I'd like to cut the show in half, and by that I mean concentrate maybe the first 10-15 minutes on March Madness, which really begins on Thursday with a whole slew of games, and actually tips off technically on Tuesday and Wednesday of this week in Dayton with play-in games to be played at the Flyers home court. And of course the Flyers are on their way to the NIT. The Dayton Flyers didn't make the muster as they were one of the Atlantic 10 teams. You could actually say slighted. You know, they did play an unbelievable schedule this year, especially at the very beginning. But the Flyers just didn't have enough of what it took to make the NCAA March Madness tournament. However, 14 teams from the SEC did, and along with 4 from the ACC and a slew from the Big Ten, those big 4 that I have focused on with the big arm, they took home 33 bids. Actually, I shouldn't say it that way. They took home 4 automatics and then another 29 at-large bids in the progressively growing tournament, which at one time started with 8, went to about 25 when I was a kid, then to 32, and now it's at its present 68. It had been at 64 for a while, so every team had to win 5 games. Now you have the play-in. And to be honest with you, I see it just growing again somewhere along the line. But the reason I have the cartoon today is just to bring up, it's something that I've harped on with college football back in October and November. I think a couple of things are unfolding with college sports. One is this: the NIL deals, name, image, and likeness. It's probably going to get so out of reach for many of the, what I like to call the small schools, many Catholic schools, and the hyphenated schools in state, in big time state schools like the Alabamas and the Michigans and all the rest of it in those particular types of states. There's just, I don't know whether there is not, the pie is too big, is not big enough to slice evenly, or these really the big 4, I call them a cartel now, because they've really swallowed up a lot of leagues and have really secured themselves from the East to the West Coast. I mean, just think about what the Big Ten has done. They have 18 teams now and still call themselves the Big Ten because they don't want to lose the copyright nor the marketing of that Big Ten and the whole connotation of the Big Ten. But they have teams on the East Coast with Rutgers and Maryland. They have teams in the Central Time Zone with the traditional Big East teams. They have teams basically almost in the Rocky Mountain Zone, but they definitely have 4 teams on the Pacific West Coast in Oregon, Washington, USC, and UCLA. They have a huge market in Los Angeles. They have, of course, the traditional markets in Chicago and Detroit. I'd even say this, even though Ohio doesn't have a big, quote unquote, city, they've got 3 major cities, and I remember this from trivia, all begin with the letter C: Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland, that have a huge number of citizens. And they are, okay, maybe mid-major markets, but together they're a major market in Ohio. What I'm trying to say is this: I don't think it's without design. I think it is premeditated that these 4 football conferences are just piecemealing other schools and picking off other conferences in the meantime by taking the elite schools from those conferences and putting them into their own, because eventually I really do believe this. I'm going to make a prediction. I think the NCAA is, well, first of all, it's inept, but I think they're really impotent to what is coming down the road. And that is these conferences are just going to forgo playing under the umbrella of NCAA regulations and just going full-blown professional, almost like minor leagues for both football and basketball, and of course the other sports. And what's that's going to happen? You're probably going to have these four conferences really not just dominating, but probably being in their own division. And then the other schools, all 300 and whatever is left, 320 or 310 Division One, let's say basketball schools, going to have to fend for themselves or play obviously in a lower level. I'm even thinking of it this way. I see it that almost like the European soccer leagues, where if you have a crummy season, you go down division until you improve, then they move up to the elite squads. I really see college sports turning that way. I don't know whether it's going to be really good for college sports. And I'm just making a prediction here. I have some, maybe not so much evidence, but I have some, I would say, data on it in terms of this. I don't, like I said, well, some theory, it's more theory, but I don't think it's without a doubt that these organizations are just growing for the purpose of separating themselves from the smaller conferences and all the rest of it. I mean, put it this way. Within a year, the Pac-10, which originally was the Pac-8, which had another name, the AAWC, and then for years was the Pac-8 with the 4 California schools, the 2 Oregon schools, the 2 Washington schools. Then they let in or gave membership to the Arizona schools, Arizona State and Arizona. Then it was Utah. The Pac-10 doesn't even exist anymore because the Big Ten, the ACC, and the Big 12 snagged the other schools. California and Stanford going to the ACC, Oregon, Washington going to the Big Ten, along with USC and UCLA. Almost forgot that really they were the prize. And then Utah going to the Big 12, along with Colorado, which was also a member of the Pac-12. The SEC grew in a different way. They added teams that were originally in the Southwest Conference and in the Big 8 to their growing. Oklahoma, Texas, 2 big nuggets right there. Both football tradition, both have good basketball, but for football. And then the ACC, I think I've said this before, don't call themselves the Atlantic Coast Conference, call them the A&P Conference, with the additions of SMU from Texas, Stanford, and Northern California being represented in the ACC. So it's kind of crazy. And as a result of all this, here's the problem. You have 14 teams from the Southeast Conference who have made it to the NCAA. Now, that's not an indictment of those teams. It's certainly, obviously, the Big Four have the most talent. They play the best basketball. They play the best football. We get all that. But I think now when you are really tipping the scales, just weighing it down, when you have 33 of the 68 teams, almost half coming from those major conferences, I think you really have a problem. Because basketball is a little bit different. Basketball, you don't have to be a football factory to have a competitive team. All you need are 10 players when you think about it. Maybe not even that. Maybe just 3 or 4 to make your team really good and really develop a dynasty within either your own conference or within the NCAA basketball brackets. And I'm just thinking right now off the top of my head, I mean, think of what Gonzaga has done for the last 20, 25 years. They were always a somewhat good basketball power. They had been in the NCAAs before, but then over the last 20, 25 years, they've really grown into a national name. In fact, I'm the biggest hypocrite because I always thought that the Big East should take St. Mary's and Gonzaga and just go coast to coast like the ACC and the Big Ten. And it would make, to me, a little bit more sense. You'd have 13 teams. You could add one more team, maybe like St. Louis or Dayton, and you'd have a great 14-team league. So I'm just as bad because I want other teams from other leagues to give my conference credibility. But my whole point is this. No football at Gonzaga. And yet it's a competitor. It has competed. It's played in the championship game. It's made the Final Four. It's been close, Elite Eights. I know that during Connecticut's first championship run, it was the Gonzaga Bulldogs that lost to them in the regional semifinals in 1999. A game that was really a real grind game. Great defense on both sides. I just remember it because, it was just neither team could really break the other team's defense, and came down to like a 57-52 final or 52-49. I can't think of it offhand right now, but it was a real grind out defensive battle. And you have other teams like UC San Diego, which is a story this year because this is the first year that they're in Division I, and they got all their players via transfers. They got them through transfers, through lower divisions coming up from Division II to Division I. So they're a story within themselves. So I think they have a chance against Michigan, maybe for about 30 minutes. But I think the Michigan Wolverines with that kid Wolf are just going to just wear them down and show once again that the big conferences just have the depth that the smaller schools, the smaller conferences can't secure because of lack of money, or just lack of tradition, or just lack of publicity / being known as a basketball school. So it's tough. It's tough for them. And my whole point with those Big Four is that they really don't want those little guys in, because that means it carves up the pie into smaller pieces. They want all of that pie to themselves. That's why they're eventually, I really do. I think they're going to have the TV money. They have networks already. They have fan base. They have large, pretty much land grant schools. They're just going to move out along with Notre Dame. The only I would say, state school that's not affiliated, at least in football, with any of the conferences that would also be forced or would want to leave. And remember, this began basically back in the 90s when the court said that the TV money or TV networks, or, the conferences could negotiate their own deals. In effect, the NCAA was no longer needed. That's why I think these schools are now starting to, we don't need the NCAAs. We can actually regulate ourselves or get a commissioner to help us regulate. So I'm just saying now, I think some of the charm of March Madness has been lost now with this overrepresentation of the Big Four. Like I said, I call them the cartel. I mean, put it this way. The four number ones are Auburn, Duke, Florida, and Houston. The number twos in each way are Michigan State, Alabama, St. John's, the only one, and Tennessee. Of the from eight members involved in either seed 1 and 2, only one is outside the cartel, the Big Four. And how bad has it become? I'm telling you right now. Do you realize this? And I guess this is why it's such a charm. Since 1985, when you had 3 Big East teams and Memphis, which is a I'm going to say a cartel team, a non-big conference football affiliated school, even though they play big time football in the AAC. At the time, they were in the Metro, which had some teams like Louisville, Cincinnati, Memphis, Tulane, etc. The last time the ACC was not represented, the Big Ten was not represented, the Big 8 or the Big 12 was not represented. I'll even throw in the Pac-10 was not represented, and I'm leaving one out. Oh, and the Southeast Conference was not represented in the Final Four. You got to go back 40 years. Since then, because I was doing the research, and I'm not going to pull it up right now, but since 1986 to last year's tournament, you've had at least one representative from those big four. One. In some cases, you had three. And I think in one case, you had all four were from the ACC, the Big Ten, the SEC, or the Big 12. And I got to throw, and I'm not even counting UCLA or the Pac-10 in that, which you could say right now is in the Big Ten, but they were dominant as well. So I think basketball, I think the NCAA has to do something with this. And I am really to the point that I think all the teams should make the tournament, March Madness. I think it would be fun. It would be fair. You could still seed them. More than likely, the Big Four would have the biggest advantages. They would probably get opening round buys because I think there's maybe 325, 326 teams. So it doesn't break down to, divisions of four. Nevertheless, just have everybody in. And if you still wanted to play the conference, you could. And that would be for basically getting better positioning in seeding. So, for instance, I'm going to use Dayton because it's my buddy's team. Had they finished, I think, third in the Atlantic 10. Had they won the conference tournament, now they would obviously move up, or their projection would be higher since they moved up. And you could actually say, hey, if you win the conference, since there's, let's say, 31 or 32 conferences, every one of them would get, let's say, a bid from either 4 to 1. Just who cares? If you're going to hurt a Big 10 or a Big 12 team because you thought they should have deserved the 4 and now you see them 6, well, if they're that good, then they should be good enough to move on despite that seeding. I just think it would be a lot of fun that way because it would just add, I think, the madness. They copyrighted the term. They want to push the term that there's chaos. But at the end of the day, on Sunday of this week, you're going to see reality hit as they get back down to the Sweet 16. And really what happens is the pretenders in the Big Four, some of them get bumped off early. Those are the opening round surprises and upsets. Think about Kentucky with St. Peter's. Think about Purdue with FDU. But then by Sunday, all those little schools that had that moment in the sun, they're wiped out. They're vanquished. I know St. Peter's went to the Elite Eight, but they didn't get to the Final Four. I think that was just happenstance. They played great, but they ran into a buzzsaw called North Carolina. A traditional team, yes, but it's from the big conferences. That helps them more. So what you should do with March Madness, just open it up to 325 teams. It's only an extra weekend. In fact, it would make it a lot of fun. You could push back or push it forward, however TV wants to do it, because that's what they want. They want to push this, expand the seasons more and more. And at the end of the season, you have 325 teams. There's nobody saying, hey, I should have been in, but I got X'd out like a West Virginia instead of North Carolina in the play-in game. West Virginia feels that they were eliminated unfairly, not even in the selection. Let them all in. And it might keep the essence of what March Madness is supposed to be. Some fun, some romance. Yeah, it always comes down to the Big Four, but every once in a while, you may get that little Gonzaga in there in the Final Four and the champions, that Butler, 2 years in a row, losing at the buzzer to Duke, right? Maybe Seton Hall. I mean, think about it. Seton Hall's from a big conference, the Big East. They've made the Final Four once. And actually, the Big East has, you could argue, well, the Big East disproves your whole theory. Yes, they've won 6 titles in the last 13 years, but they are relegated to 2 teams, Villanova and UConn. And in the last 3 years, Villanova has you could actually argue has come down to earth. They're not Duke, where Duke just churns out players and is able to get the blue chip players. Villanova's not there. If they were, they would have had Cooper Flagg. If Boston College, well, I shouldn't say Boston College. If St. John's was there, they would have had Cooper Flagg. Cooper Flagg goes to the Big Four. He goes to the elite teams. He goes to the most noticed teams. He goes to the teams with tradition. All that. It's all part of the charm of college basketball. But it would be fun if the NCAA, if member schools treated each other like they're members instead of some treating the others like they're peons. They're below us, and we make all the money. But mark my words, I really do see those Big Four just saying, you know what, we don't need the NCAA. We can pay the players now. We can negotiate our own TV deals. We have our own networks. We have our own followings. We have huge fan bases, not just here, but all throughout the country. I mean, Michigan does. Ohio State does. I'm going to throw Notre Dame in there. Oklahoma does. I even think Alabama does too now. So it's completely changed. But take a look. And if you think it's better for the women's game, forget it. They haven't had a winner outside the Big Four and UConn since 1988 when Louisiana Tech won it. And what's even worse is that there's only been 2 teams in that time from 1988 on that you would consider outside UConn, the realm of UConn and the Big Four. And that was Oregon State in 2016 when it was in the Pac-10 for basketball, when it still existed, and a hyphen team. So, if anything, the women's game, boy, oh boy, if you're not big time in the you have no shot. You have no shot at all. And it's a shame because, as I said, the charm of the NCAA is these little schools coming out of nowhere and all of a sudden having an impact or becoming a name, at least for 15 minutes. And I think even though you can say, well, we had the St. Peter's and we had the FDUs that have, sprung the upsets. It'd be nice if they could get to the Final Four. If somehow there could be more Hoosiers in March Madness instead of traditional teams just making their way. And like I said, bullying their way and saying, hey, we can outspend you. We can out-recruit you. But we still want all the advantages when we play you head-to-head. All right. That's my little thing. If I was looking at anything with the NCAA March, I'm not even going to make picks, but I find some interesting games here. The Maryland-Grand Canyon game is going to be fun. Grand Canyon won 30 games. They've been there now 3 consecutive. Maryland's got a good club under Kevin Willard, but I think that'll be an exciting game. I like Drake over Missouri. Don't ask me why. I just do. I just think that there's got to be that one big school that just flops, and I think it might just be Missouri in the first round. I like St. John's over Omaha, although I haven't seen Omaha. I know they're kind of tough. I'll be rooting for Xavier over Texas, obviously. And interesting game might be that San Diego State-North Carolina game. I actually think North Carolina is going to win that game, but that should be a fun game. I could see that being like 75-74 going to the end. Houston might just be back. I've seen them play a little bit this year. Gonzaga, Georgia. That should be a fun matchup. I'm going to take the Bulldogs. You figure out what team that is, okay? Clemson, McNeese State, Purdue, High Point. I know that quite a few people are high on Clemson. Illinois plays the winner of the 11 matchup, I believe, between Texas and Xavier. Kentucky, Troy. I don't think Kentucky is. Well, they will probably struggle against Troy, but I see them moving on. UCLA, here's a good game. I kind of like that UCLA-Utah State game. Obviously, you always have to say this. It's a tough game. Utah State has had some good teams over the last 3-4 years. That could be a fun game. That could be a fun game in the 7-10. And then in the other sides of the brackets, Duke's probably going to get to the final, to the Sweet 16 with Cooper Flagg or without him. They're scary. I saw them, they still won 30 games for a team that's off, right? Or that maybe people didn't think of. Man, oh man, they came on in a fury. They've got 30 wins. Mississippi State, Baylor. You're talking about an ex-champ, Baylor, over the last 5 years against Mississippi State, which had traditional, they made the Final Four in 96. They've had good basketball teams. I'm going to go with Mississippi State in that game. Oregon, Liberty, I know everyone's been kind of saying, hey, Liberty could cause them problems. Liberty Bibbity is something that they've been showing. I just think Oregon's going to be too strong for them. BYU, VCU. I saw VCU play quite a bit this year. I haven't seen BYU. That could be a fun game. And St. Mary's, Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt crushed Seton Hall this year with threes from a couple of transfer players. That should be a fun game too, that 7-10. On the other side, the Marquette, New Mexico's game should be interesting, although I think Marquette will prevail. And as I said, Louisville, Creighton, I kind of like Creighton. They're two different teams, but I kind of like Creighton in that game. Now, do I think Creighton can beat Auburn? I thought they could. I still think they can. And then the other 8-9 game, I believe on this side, UConn, Oklahoma. I kind of like UConn. Somehow they're going to figure it out. I know that that's just a blip, losing to Seton Hall. It's just a blip. But I think they're they're a good team. They won 24 games this year. Even in a non-great year, Connecticut can be dangerous. I don't really see any of the Big East going to the Final Four. In fact, I can even see this. How about this? I could actually see all four number ones probably winding up in the Final Four. Wouldn't that be a great Final Four? Auburn, Duke, Houston, and Florida. Of those four, I like John Broome of Auburn. I would probably root for either Auburn or Houston. All right. There's my take right now on March Madness. And I said, don't take it to the bank. I'm terrible making picks. I'm too biased or prejudiced towards my teams. If Seton Hall were in this, if they were the 16th seed in a playing game against the team that won 40 games, I'd still say Seton Hall's winning the whole thing. So it's bad. It's bad. One good thing, though, when you don't get involved with the pools at work and all the rest of it, is that you can watch these, let's say the 3-14s or the 6-11 games or the 2-15s and have a lot of fun with them rooting for the underdog. And you don't have to worry about your pool going to pot. And maybe you can still be in the pot of gold on this St. Patrick's Day evening. All right. I was thinking about this the other day, and I'm probably going to do a little bit more study on this, but Tito Francona just recently became the manager of the Cincinnati Reds. And I like him. Of course, he led the Red Sox, ended their curse, winning a number of World Series for the Beantown, and then moved on to Cleveland. I thought he was going to do the same in 2016. Had he beaten the Cubs, it would have been interesting. And this is another hypothetical, but these are fun for me, so too bad if nobody likes them. But imagine if Tito wins in Cleveland, beats Chicago in that 7th game. And maybe Chicago fires Madden and Epstein hires Tito to win with the Cubs. And he leads the Cubs that following year to a championship. Imagine if he had 3 World Series rings with the 3 most cursed franchises in baseball history. That would be amazing. and he would probably go down as the greatest manager in baseball history, because how could he not? Ending 3 curses. But Tito was named the manager of the Reds. He had been sick and kind of retired. I never thought we'd see him again. And apparently he's rested, he's feeling better, and he decided Cincinnati actually made a smart move. Even if he doesn't win any games, they made a smart move because it was with a splash over the winter, actually late fall, when Cincinnati hired him. I just remember texting my brother right away and said, "Can you believe this? The Reds got Francona." And he was like the same way. He was like, "We're excited," because the Reds are just a couple of pieces away. Now, they did trade India, who I really like. My brother loves him. I like him a lot. I think he's a real gruddy. Yeah, I like that. I'm going to call it gruddy. That's a combination of gutty and gritty. How's that for neologism? So a gruddy player in Jonathan India. They traded him to Kansas City. They got a pitcher in return. Name escapes me right now, but I want to stay focused on the fact that Francona. So I was looking at this. I was thinking, well, DeRocher managed both Brooklyn and the Giants, 2 rival teams. And Berra managed both the Yankees and the Mets, rival teams, and so did Casey. So I was thinking of this. How many Cleveland Indian managers also managed the Cincinnati Reds, or vice versa, Cincinnati Reds and Cleveland Indians? So I went through Baseball Reference all the way back before, right to the AL first years, 1901. And I discovered that, ready for this, Bertie Tebbetts managed both Cleveland from 1964 to 66 and the Reds from 1954 to 58. Now, he was much more successful. Well, you tell me. He was 25 games over, 15 games over with the Reds. He was 372 and 357 with the Reds from 54 to 58. So you're talking about 4 seasons. No, 54, 5, 6, 7, and 8. 5 seasons, excuse me. I always forget to be inclusive. And Tebbetts, 64, 65, 66, managed the Indians, 278 and 259 during that time. And I think it may be even longer. So he was, 18 games over 500. So he's kind of equal. Neither team won. The Reds were just on the verge of getting a guy, or had Frank Robinson in 56. So they were just growing into the pennant-winning team of 61 and having some good clubs in the 60s. They had Jim O'Toole, Bob Purdy, all these players. Eventually would have in 63 Pete Rose, and then that would be the essence of the Big Red Machine moving up. And of course, 64, 65, 66 Cleveland, you had some players there. You had Sam McDowell. I think you had Rocky Colavito, but he was an aging Colavito. So you say, well, for the most part, 278, 259, 372, and 357. All in all, won over 600 games. So it's probably a wash. Bertie Tebbetts and at Cincinnati and Cleveland. Then I found this. Jimmy Dykes managed both Cincinnati and Cleveland. Now, technically, he really only managed Cincinnati for 41 games. He was actually 24 and 17 with the Reds in 1958. Not bad. But then they just stopped. Didn't manage. And then would move on. Right? He was just gone, Jimmy Dykes. So he was just an interim. And believe me, he was an interim. He would manage other places, kind of like a 500 manager. He goes to Cleveland. He's 103 and 115 and 60 and 61. Take it as it is. All I know is this. If you take a look at Jimmy Dykes' career, he's about a 500 manager. But the guys who interested me the most was John McNamara. McNamara managed Cincinnati to their last, well, I shouldn't say their last pennant. Well, their last pennant of the 1970s. They won I shouldn't say pennant. They won the Western Division title and, of course, were smoked by Pittsburgh, the family team. But he led the Reds to a 279, 244, 533 winning percentage and the Western Division title. He had Tom Seaver winning 14 games that year. He had an aging Johnny Bench, older Dave Concepcion. It was really the farewell, the swan song of that great red machine of the 1970s. But here's the kicker. As I went all through the whole thing, and I'm going to delve into this next time with, I want to do a show on the last player managers of each individual teams. And that's kind of interesting in itself. So I want to save that. I just want to focus on this. Here's what I really found interesting. The number of Reds managers that also managed Detroit, the Tigers. And I'm going to start with this. Fred Hutchinson, who I just remember my brother Jim always felt sorry for him. He came down, I think, with cancer while he was managing. And I believe was forced out either at the end of the season or late in the season and passed away, resulting from cancer. But Fred Hutchinson was that 61 manager for the Reds who led them to their only pennant in the 60s, and really their first pennant since 1940. And of course, they were beaten by the Yankees 4-1. They had Frank Robinson on that team, Jim O'Toole, and other good, solid players. I think Perky might have been on that team. And Mayo Smith managed the Reds and Detroit. And of course, his thing, he won the 68 World Series for the Tigers. The last one the Tigers had won until 1984. Do you realize that the Tigers, like the Reds, man, they've gone 30-some. Actually, the Tigers have gone 40 years without winning a World Series. Now, they had been there 2012 with that great pitching staff, starting staff of Verlander and David Price and Porcello. But Mayo Smith managed the Reds. They were 34-37 under him. And here's a guy that was a kicker, because I remember more when you talk about the Brooklyn Dodger lore, and that was Charlie Dressen. He managed Detroit to a 221 and 189 record from 1965 to 66. And he managed Cincinnati to a 214 and 282 record. And I had it down and I forgot what years. But Dressen was a manager for years with the Dodgers. But of course, the big kicker, I found it amazing with Mayo Smith, but the big kicker, of course, probably one of the most successful managers in baseball, was Sparky Anderson. He managed both Cincinnati and Detroit, and they were the only two teams he managed. Interestingly enough, when I think of Sparky Anderson, I think immediately of his managerial years with the Reds. But in point of fact, he managed the Reds from only 70 to 78, was fired. So that's 9 years he was with the Cincinnati Reds. He actually managed the Tigers until he technically retired. And of course, he won the 84 World Series. They got off to that 30-5 start. But I always find it amazing, actually, that Sparky managed the Tigers longer than he did the Cincinnati Reds. And yet he was the architect of, or the leader, the engineer of that big red machine of the 1970s. And all Sparky did was win 70, 72, 75, 76 pennants. He won divisions in 73. And then he goes with Detroit. He wins a couple of titles with Detroit. He won the 87 American League East and, of course, 84 World Series with the Tigers as they defeated the San Diego Padres in 5 games. But it's amazing. My second half of the show is given to some of the managers who led and guided both the Indians and the Cincinnati Reds. And we'll talk more about guys who have managed rival teams in the same city or state. This is Will O'Toole. Thank you again for joining us on Park Ridge Sports. I'll be back next week with another edition. Thank you.